Can Texas quarterback Quinn Ewers be the top quarterback in college football by the end of 2024? I think the short answer is yes, right? I think he's already one of the top quarterbacks heading into the season. Some may have him as the top quarterback. And unlike 2023, where we had Drake May and Caleb Williams, there was a clear, top two guys heading into the season. There's not really a clear top tier this year, right? Like even last year, you had the Bo Nix and Michael Penix and Jay Daniels, and I know they blew up last season, but they were still trending in that direction. This year's it's a little bit different. I think it's totally up for grabs, right? Is it Carson Beck? Is it Quinn Ewers? Cam Ward? Shedeur Sanders? I mean, there's some unknowns about who's the top quarterback heading into the season. I think Quinn's definitely one of the top quarterbacks, and by the end of the season, I definitely think he could be the top quarterback in not just in the SEC, but in college football. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about the pathway to be the best quarterback in 2024. What has to happen? What games does he have to perform really, really well in to be that top quarterback? I think we saw a big improvement from 2022 to 2023. We saw all the numbers improve. We saw some big steps in development. We saw some changes, especially in the athleticism department, which I think is a bigger factor than maybe given credit for, right? So let's talk about Quinn Ewers. Let's talk about the areas of improvements. Let's talk about what needs to happen in 2024 to be the best quarterback in college football. And this is your first time tuning in. QB Spotlight is just a big quarterback hub. We talk all things quarterback. So if quarterback's kind of your niche, especially college quarterbacks, SEC quarterbacks, consider subscribing to the channel and following us along. So last year, Quinn Ewers, 3,479 yards passing. His completion percentage was 69, 8.8 yards per attempt, 22 passing touchdowns, 6 picks, 5 TDs on the ground. So really big steps. He missed a few games, but 2 games that Malik Murphy had to play for him. And then, of course, led Texas to the college football playoffs and a Big 12 championship. So great season, right? Where did he improve? Well, accuracy, number one. In 2022, his completion percentage was 58%. Last year was 69, right? So over 11% increase in his accuracy. Now, a lot of that has to do with probably being a bit more healthy, but I think you saw him more comfortable in the offense. He had a better kind of camaraderie and relationship on the field with the players where he was able to anticipate throws a bit more as opposed to waiting for them to come open, right? Number 2, he pushed the ball downfield a lot more. Now, it's still an area that you want to improve on, but in Sark's offense, a lot of times it was get rid of the ball quick. You got Worthy to get the ball quick. You got some playmakers that you want to throw the ball to quickly. So they didn't always need to push the ball downfield, but still, he went from 7.4 to 8.8. That's a pretty big improvement, right? So it's an area of work still. You probably want to be a bit more consistent in that department, but at the end of the day, like if the offense doesn't call to push the ball downfield, you don't have that much control over it. Number 3, I think it was the use of his legs. Now, he's never going to be a Lamar Jackson, obviously, but I think the fact that he's no longer considered a statue, at least in my mind, I think is enough threat for the defense, but also if the play breaks down or if he need to use his legs, he can, right? He only had 75 yards last year on the ground, but it was timely. The year before, he had like negative 50. Now, a lot of sack yards come into play with that, but he had some pretty, big runs, five touchdowns on the ground. So enough to keep drives alive, and it's just another threat for him, right? So not a statue, not a blazer, but enough to move. So why did he improve? Well, I think it's easy. He had more experience, more time with Sark, and he had some NFL guys to throw to. So that brings me to 2024. He's got even more experience. He's got another year under his belt, and he has more NFL guys to throw to. That always helps, especially with a play caller like Sark. So I know it's way too early to kind of predict what's going to happen in 2024, but I do think another jump is probably expected. If he takes another jump from what he did last year, he could definitely be the top quarterback in 2024, especially with all the unknowns for the other quarterbacks in college football. So you want to continue to push the ball downfield, like we talked about. He only had 16 completions where the ball was thrown 20 yards or more in the air. So that was like 8th in the Big 12. Again, we talked about why it's not that big of a deal. People make it out to be a big deal, but when you're getting the ball out quick and you're up in all the games, you don't need to. But I think to be the best quarterback, I think that number has to improve a little bit. Also, play action. He led the Big 12 in completions off play action. I'm sorry, he was right. Yeah, he was second only to Dylan Gabriel in completion percentage off of play action. I think like 50% of Quinn Ewers' passes were off play action, which is great. It's fine. It helps open up receivers. So I think if he's able to take the next step, where say if a team takes away the run game or play action doesn't work, kind of like against Alabama, and you're forced to make more reads and throws without play action getting defenders out of position, then I think that is also a good kind of measuring stick, if you will, of progress and being able to take the next step and develop. 26.9% of his completions were thrown behind the line of scrimmage. That's a lot, right? Like basically almost 30% of all of your completions were screens, essentially, or not necessarily screens, but bubble screens, quick throws to the receivers, right? But at the same time, the offense calls for that. So I see a lot of people talk about, they didn't push the ball downfield, but at the same time, the offense that Sark runs, when you have the receivers that you have, it kind of calls for that, right? But still, to be considered the best in college football, I think you want to see more downfield shots. Okay, so let's get the big games. I think to end up being the best, I think, like we talked about, some of the improvement areas have to continue to happen. But I think you have to stand out in the really big games. That's just kind of the nature of football in any sport, right? Like, it's great if you have big games against lower level teams, but you got to stand out in the big games. And Quinn Ewers, they had a few big games last year, like against Bama, one of his best games. It was huge, right? So he showed he can do that. Against Oklahoma, bad start, but he bounced back and actually played a pretty good game after that rough start. I think he threw a pick or two at the beginning, had a rough start, but was able to bounce back. And then against Washington, that's probably the only big game where the whole team just wasn't clicking on all cylinders, and they still had a chance to win the game at the end. Right, so 2024, what are the big games I think you need to stand out with? Michigan, week 2. That's going to be huge, right? Even with Michigan losing their coach and a new quarterback and just some turnover going on, it's still at Michigan. I'm like 99% sure, so Texas fans don't get mad if I'm wrong. But you're going to have to stand out in that game, big time. That's going to be the biggest game of that week, one of the biggest non-conference games, one of the biggest games in college football this year. So you got to stand out there. That'd be huge. Game number 2 against OU. Now, OU is not expected to be as good this year. Like, their win totals came out like, 7.5? But it's still a rivalry, and it's still OU. Like, you never count on OU, and OU beat them last year, right? So stand out against OU. Game number 3 that you got to stand out, Georgia. Best team in college football, probably coming back. Now, that game is at Texas, I believe. So, again, Texas fans don't get mad if it's not. But you got to stand out against Georgia. You got to have a big game against Georgia. Even if you don't win, if you play well against Georgia, then that goes a long way. Now Carson Beck, the Georgia quarterback, he's someone else who is probably being considered as being the top quarterback in 2024. That's a big game for him too. So depending who wins that game or who plays better at the quarterback position in that game could determine like what way people feel about who's the best quarterback in 2024. In the last game, Texas A&M. The rivalry is back. We're here in Austin, been in Texas most of our lives. So definitely a big rivalry, definitely a big game that if you play really well in that game, people are going to remember it, right? So those 4 games, I think they're big games for Quinn Ewers to stand out. So continue to make those improvements, continue to push the ball downfield, and if they take away play action, show that, hey, I don't need play action to make throws. I think he showed it last year. There just wasn't, like, Sark's offense calls for so much play action. But you want to be able to show, hey, I can make throws without the use of play action. I can push the ball downfield, right? So heading into 2024, he's one of the top quarterbacks, not just in the SEC, but in all of college football. And I think another year, another offseason under his belt, I expect more growth and more development, and definitely a pathway to potentially be the best quarterback in college football this year. But I want to hear from you. 1, what do you think the pathway is? 2, do you think he can be the best quarterback in college football? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And again, if you like this video or this quarterback niche type stuff, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and sharing the channel. It really does help, and keep following us along. We'll see you next time. Peace.